I don't promise to forget the mystery, but I know I'll have a marvelous time. These words, spoken by a young detective in 1932, weren't just a character's casual remark. They were a promise delivered to generations. Her name is Nancy Drew. For nearly a century, she has been more than just a character in a book. She's been an inspiration, a confidant, a symbol of youthful ingenuity and daring. She figured in the imaginations of precocious, aspiring children ever since the publication of The Secret of the Old Clock in 1930. She was, for many, the more overtly perspicacious Elle Woods of an older generation. Future Supreme Court justices, iconic entertainers, media moguls, they all found something in Nancy. But who is Nancy Drew? And how has she remained relevant through seismic shifts in culture, technology, and what we expect from our heroines? She has undergone major rewritings, many warranted, yet has somehow retained her core, an adventurous, brave, intelligent young woman acting with integrity and compassion. This is a journey into the heart of a literary phenomenon. We'll explore her origins, her enduring appeal, and the fascinating, recent transformation, the shift from mysteries where ghosts were always a clever disguise, to a world where the supernatural might just be real. If you were born in a few years chunk of the late 90s or early 2000s, you might remember them, those iconic yellow book spines with blueprint, often found in treasured sets. The gateway to a world of adventure. The books transport us to River Heights, a seemingly quiet Midwestern town near Chicago. Here lives Nancy, the teenage sleuth, daughter of the esteemed defense lawyer Carson Drew, with her mother having passed when she was young and her father often away on business. Nancy possesses a rare combination for a young woman of her era: time, resources, and a remarkable degree of freedom. She drives a convertible, a symbol of her independence. Her days are filled not with tea parties, but with thrilling adventures alongside her loyal best friends, the practical, tomboyish George Fane, and the more traditionally feminine, often anxious, Bess Marvin. And then there's her helpful, compliant boyfriend, Ned Nickerson, always ready to lend a hand, but never overshadowing our heroine. Largely left to her own devices, Nancy pursues her mysteries with unwavering determination. These aren't simple neighborhood puzzles. Her quests take her to summit harrowing mountain passes, to ride wild horses through the deserts of the American Southwest, and crucially, to uncover dastardly deeds often disguised as ghostly happenings. Consider the breadth of her supposed skill set. Penny Warner's official Nancy Drew handbook lists ice skating, Morse code, horseback riding, walking in high heels, hand-to-hand combat, rowing, cooking, fluency in foreign languages, sewing, and learning to swim as essential knowledge. A veritable polymath in a skirt. For a young female character created only 10 years after American women legally gained the right to vote, Nancy Drew embodies a remarkable spirit of independence. She takes full advantage of every ounce of autonomy she can wrangle. This was revolutionary. Central to her story, readers agree, is the sense that no higher authority can really solve her mysteries. The adults are often too distracted, too busy, or too easily fooled. Nancy's attitude towards them is typically defiant but efficient. She circumvents authority but rarely aims to dismantle the system itself. It is the mystery she loves more than its conclusion. As she herself observes in The Hidden Staircase from 1930, although she was glad it was all over, she could not help but look forward to another mystery to solve. And for nearly a century, new mysteries have always found Nancy Drew, but the nature of those mysteries and Nancy herself would not remain static. The girl detective was destined to evolve, reflecting the changing world around her, and in doing so, raising new questions about who she is and what she represents. The first 5 books of the Nancy Drew Mystery Stories series are arguably the most iconic in public consciousness. The Secret of the Old Clock, The Hidden Staircase, The Bungalow Mystery, The Mystery at Lilac Inn, The Secret of Shadow Ranch. These titles resonate, conjuring images of daring escapades and clever solutions. To read all 175 books in the original series is an act of true dedication. By some calculations, that's over 36,000 pages, the equivalent of devouring War and Peace 26 times over. But who is the mind behind these early formative adventures? The answer, like many of Nancy's cases, is more complex than it first appears. The early books were primarily written by a woman named Mildred Wirt Benson, a name largely unknown to the millions who devoured her words. She was a ghostwriter, meticulously following outlines provided by Edward Stratemeyer, the mastermind behind the literary powerhouse known as the Stratemeyer Syndicate. The series has always been published under a single, enigmatic pseudonym, Carolyn Keene. The ghostwriters, like Benson, were paid a flat fee, approximately 3 months' wages for each book, and, in signing their contracts, relinquished any claim to the name or the characters they helped bring to life. This contractual anonymity makes tracing exact authorship for some of the later books a detective story in itself. Mildred Wirt Benson, however, was no mere typist translating outlines. She infused Nancy with a spirit that mirrored her own. Benson was an adventurer, an aviator, an archaeologist, a journalist who traveled the world. She embodied the self-assured, independent aspects of Nancy Drew in her own remarkable life. It's said she chafed at some of Stratemeyer's more restrictive guidelines, pushing for a more daring, more capable Nancy. Like many prolific authors, Benson cultivated a second passion project on the side, the Penny Parker series. She reportedly described Penny Parker as a better Nancy Drew than Nancy is. Yet, the Penny Parker books are far harder to come by today, their specific merits largely obscured by the colossal shadow of Nancy Drew, what made Penny better in Benson's eyes remains a tantalizing, almost lost clue. The Nancy Drew Mystery Story series was a flagship product of a revolutionary publishing model pioneered by Edward Stratemeyer. He had already found success with this approach with his earlier series, the Rover Boys series for young Americans, which ran from 1899 to 1926. Stratemeyer's genius lay in recognizing the public's appetite for consistent, series-based fiction. His method was akin to a modern television showrunner. Stratemeyer would create the characters, develop the basic premise, and provide a detailed plot outline, a far vaguer version, perhaps, than a screenwriter's script. This outline would then be handed off to a team of freelance writers. In the case of the Nancy Drew books, these writers were usually, though not always, women. Their task was to flesh out the outline into a book of somewhere between 200 and 250 pages. By publishing these freelancers under a single, consistent pseudonym, Carolyn Keene for Nancy Drew, Franklin W. Dixon for the Hardy Boys, Stratemeyer achieved remarkable efficiency and brand consistency. He could produce far more books each year than any single author ever could, creating an episodic style with recognizable characters and familiar plot structures. This episodic style was neater, more cleanly segmented than the popular, sprawling serial narratives of the previous century, think of Dickens, or perhaps more relevantly to the mystery genre, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories, which often appeared in monthly installments. The freelancers working for Stratemeyer had little incentive to write dramatic cliffhangers leading into the next book, as their individual plots came pre-outlined. Nancy Drew has no Reichenbach fall, no single, overarching Moriarty-like nemesis whose threat looms from one volume to the next, fading in and out of the plot until the writer decides their ultimate fate. Instead, the books are tidy, self-contained adventures. While immensely popular, this formula did lead to a certain repetitiveness, particularly as the series stretched into dozens, then scores, then well over 100 volumes. But this very tidiness, this episodic nature, would, decades later, lend itself gloriously to the formula of television. Edward Stratemeyer, who died in 1930, just as Nancy Drew was taking her first courageous steps into the literary world, would never live to see this. He wouldn't know the full extent of his creation's enduring power, nor the challenges and transformations Nancy would face as she stepped off the page and onto the screen. The first major adaptation of the Nancy Drew Mystery Stories series wouldn't arrive until 1977, almost half a century after the publication of The Hidden Staircase. And when it did, it would highlight the unique difficulties in translating this particular girl detective to a new medium. For nearly 50 years, Nancy Drew existed solely on the printed page. Her adventures were confined to the imaginations of her readers, her appearance shaped by cover art and internal illustrations. But the allure of such a popular character was too strong for the burgeoning world of television to ignore. In 1977, almost half a century after the publication of The Hidden Staircase, Nancy Drew made her screen debut. The adaptation was titled The Hardy Boys' Nancy Drew Mysteries. It was an ambitious attempt to bring two of the Stratemeyer syndicate as most beloved properties to a shared audience. On paper, it might have seemed like a surefire hit, two sets of popular teen detectives, solving mysteries side by side or in alternating episodes. However, translating these literary icons proved a tall order, especially given the perceived gender split between their respective readerships. The Hardy Boys, Frank and Joe, were marketed primarily to boys, their adventures often emphasizing action and daring. Nancy Drew, while equally adventurous, had a strong following among girls, her stories blending mystery with elements of social navigation and personal independence. The on-screen chemistry and narrative balance proved difficult to maintain. Predictably, perhaps for the television landscape of the late 1970s, the Nancy Drew element of the show was eventually discontinued. The program was renamed simply The Hardy Boys for its final season. Nancy's first foray into live-action adaptation was, in essence, cut short. This early experience highlighted a persistent challenge. Nancy Drew, a character who occupies a sort of smart Barbie niche in American cultural consciousness, a perception that, while perhaps reductive, speaks to her blend of intelligence, capability, and classic femininity, has been found consistently difficult to cast and to adapt successfully. The actress portraying her needs to embody intelligence without seeming aloof, bravery without recklessness, and a certain timeless charm that appeals across generations. The 1977 series was the only attempt to bring Nancy to the screen that met with a lukewarm reception. Over the decades, several other adaptations, both for television and film, struggled to capture the elusive magic of the books, often leaving dedicated fans and new audiences wanting. Each attempt faced the inherent difficulty of modernizing a character, rooted in a specific era while trying to retain her core appeal. These adaptations, even the less successful ones, often came with interesting, sometimes necessary, changes to the essential groundwork laid out in the books. The transition from page to screen, from one generation of readers to another, necessitates a degree of reinterpretation. The Nancy Drew of the 1930s, for all her admirable qualities, couldn't simply be transplanted unchanged into the 1970s, or the 2000s, or the 2020s, without some accommodation for shifting cultural norms and audience expectations. The first and arguably positive, change often involved a subtle recharacterization of Nancy herself. This was presumably to accommodate these shifts toward younger, contemporary audiences. As literary critic Olivia Rutigliano observes, a new Nancy is often necessary for a new generation. The world changes, and so too must its heroines if they are to remain resonant. These iterations also had to contend with evolving audience demands that required significant changes in setting and in tone. The Nancy Drew of the books lived in the fictional, somewhat idyllic Midwestern town of River Heights, but adaptations sought to place her in more contemporary, perhaps more visually dynamic settings. The 2007 movie, for example, transplanted Nancy to Los Angeles, centering its mystery around the film industry, a far cry from haunted mansions and missing wills in a sleepy suburb. And then there's the tone. The original books, while featuring peril and villains, generally maintained an optimistic, morally clear worldview. Mysteries were complex puzzles, but ultimately solvable through logic and pluck. As we'll see, later adaptations would begin to experiment more dramatically with this, introducing darker themes and, most notably, a very different approach to the ghosts that so often featured in Nancy's cases. The quest to bring a definitive Nancy Drew to the screen continued, each new attempt reflecting the era in which it was made. With each revival came fresh considerations of who Nancy Drew should be for a contemporary audience. The Nancy of the 2019 television series, for instance, is presented as more explicitly feminist, a more staunch defender of her emotional realities than the stoic, ever-composed Nancy of the 1930s, a Nancy who, some might argue, stayed around longer than she perhaps should have without significant internal evolution. This newer Nancy is, as critic Olivia Rutigliano puts it, a young woman already wise to the unfair ways of the world, already aware of the ineffectuality of bureaucracy, and jaded by the indifference of society to those it has screwed over. This is a far more disillusioned character than the optimistic girl detective of the Great Depression era, who was largely insulated by her upper-middle-class privilege and the safety of River Heights. And it's in these more recent adaptations, particularly the 2019 series, that a truly significant departure from the source material occurs, a departure that lies at the heart of our exploration. These new iterations lean wholeheartedly into supernatural elements that were fundamentally absent in the books. This is the shift that captures our particular interest, the way ghosts have been transfigured. In the original Carolyn Keene stories, ghosts were convenient ploys, clever tricks, theatrical effects orchestrated by very human enemies with scientific knowledge or elaborate stagecraft on their side. They were illusions to be debunked, masks to be pulled away, revealing a flesh and blood culprit with earthly motives. There were certainly moments in the books that tested the limits of credulity. In The Ghost of Blackwood Hall, published in 1948 and penned again by Mildred Wirt Benson, the seemingly supernatural occurrences are elaborate and chilling, stretching the reader's belief in what could be scientifically explained almost to its breaking point. But crucially, there was always an explanation. A rational, logical solution was paramount. Nancy's intellect, her powers of observation and deduction, were always sufficient to unravel the most spectral of deceptions. The 2019 television adaptation, however, makes a bold choice. It integrates genuine supernatural elements. Ghosts are no longer just masks for greedy relatives or cunning thieves. They are potentially real entities, forces from beyond the veil, presenting Nancy with challenges that cannot be solved by simply finding the hidden wires or the secret projector. This introduction of the truly paranormal has, understandably, met with mixed responses from audiences and critics alike. For lifelong fans, steeped in the tradition of Nancy's rational detective work, the shift can be jarring. It fundamentally alters the nature of her mysteries and the tools she requires to solve them. As a diehard science fiction and fantasy enthusiast, one might expect to welcome such a change. Yet, as a lifelong Nancy Drew enthusiast, the feeling is more complex, more torn. Does this embrace of the supernatural enhance Nancy Drew, or does it dilute what made her unique in the first place? If the ghosts are real, does Nancy cease to be the hyper-competent rationalist and become something else entirely? This deliberate pivot towards the paranormal in her modern screen adaptations isn't accidental. It reflects a broader trend in popular culture, but it also opens up new avenues for exploring Nancy's character in a contemporary context. forcing her to confront fears and uncertainties that her literary predecessor, with her unshakable confidence and empirical evidence, rarely faced. The decision to introduce genuine supernatural elements into Nancy Drew's world, particularly in the 2019 series, wasn't just a casual update. It signals a deliberate reimagining, but why this specific change? Why transform the girl detective who always found a rational explanation into a young woman confronting actual phantoms? Several possibilities emerge. The first, and perhaps most commercially pragmatic reason, could be market timing. The 2019 Nancy Drew series arrived on the CW network just as Supernatural. Their longest-running and incredibly popular paranormal show was concluding its 15-season run. Was Nancy, in part, being positioned to capture some of that audience, to fill a void in the network's lineup for spooky mysteries and dedicated fan bases? It's a plausible consideration in the business of television. A new generation of viewers, accustomed to genre-bending narratives, might expect, or even demand, a supernatural edge to their mysteries. The second potential reason lies in the visual and dramatic demands of contemporary television. Nancy Drew in the books, for all her daring, rarely engages in sustained physical combat. Her victories are primarily intellectual. She certainly never battles forces that are truly beyond the human. While compelling on the page, this might not always translate to the kind of high-stakes visual tension that modern spooky mystery shows thrive on. Introducing actual scaries, genuine ghosts, malevolent spirits, unexplained phenomena undeniably raises the visceral stakes. It allows for more visually dynamic sequences, more jump scares, and a different kind of suspense than a purely logic-based puzzle. A shadowy figure that could be a ghost is one thing. A figure that is a ghost with powers beyond human comprehension is another level of threat entirely. But there's a third, and perhaps more thematically interesting, possible reason for this evolution. Olivia Rutigliano, in her cultural history of Nancy Drew, touches upon it when she describes the new Nancy as a young woman, already wise to the unfair ways of the world, already aware of the ineffectuality of bureaucracy, and jaded by the indifference of society to those it has screwed over. This Nancy, as we've noted, is a far more disillusioned cry from the optimistic, almost invulnerable Nancy Drew of the 1930s. That earlier Nancy was largely insulated from the buffeting socioeconomic and political winds of the Great Depression, always able to return to the safety and security of her upper-middle-class Midwestern community. She operated with a fundamental faith in order, even as she worked outside official channels. This new, more jaded Nancy reflects a contemporary sensibility, one more attuned to systemic failures and the complexities of justice. And it's this Nancy who is thrust into a world where the supernatural is real. What happens, these adaptations seem to ask, when this more world-weary Nancy Drew has to make hard choices with genuinely insufficient information? What happens when the mystery isn't just a puzzle to be assembled from discernible clues, but a confrontation with the inexplicable? The character in the books, for all the perils she faced, was almost always equipped with enough data to analyze and resolve her situation if she could only put the pieces together correctly. Her intellect was her superpower, and it was always ultimately sufficient. Integrating the supernatural as a potential real opponent then knocks this modern Nancy onto far shakier footing. It tests her resilience, her courage, and perhaps even her feminism in entirely new ways. How does a rational mind, a belief in evidence, cope when faced with something that defies all known laws of science and logic? It forces her to question her own methods, her own certainties, and to find strength beyond pure intellect. This shift arguably increases the tension on what writer Megan O'Rourke described as Nancy Drew's contradictory reception. The idea that feminists can laud her as a formative girl power icon and conservatives can love her well-scrubbed middle-class values. By introducing true supernatural threats, the modern adaptations push Nancy beyond the familiar confines of her established identity, forcing her and the audience to reconsider what girl power means in a world where not all monsters are human. So, does this new supernaturally challenged Nancy pass the test? Does she retain her core identity, her feminist strength, when faced with ghosts that are more than just smoke and mirrors? In the context of these recent adaptations, it seems the answer is often yes. She adapts. She finds new ways to investigate, new strengths to draw upon, sometimes incorporating a reluctant acceptance of the inexplicable alongside her traditional detective skills. She remains, at her heart, a seeker of truth, even if the nature of that truth has become far stranger. This journey through Nancy Drew's 95-year history reveals a character remarkably resilient, yet endlessly malleable. From the pen of Mildred Wirt Benson and the outlines of Edward Stratemeyer, she emerged as a beacon of youthful independence and intellect. She was a product of her time, yet somehow managed to transcend it, becoming a touchstone for generations. Her initial adventures, with their cleverly disguised villains and rationally solvable mysteries, established a beloved formula. The books offered a comforting assurance. With courage, intelligence, and a keen eye, any puzzle could be solved, any ghost unmasked. This was the Nancy Drew who inspired countless young readers to be curious, to question, and to believe in their own capabilities. The transition to screen was fraught with challenges, highlighting the difficulty of capturing her unique essence. Early attempts often struggled to balance fidelity to the source material with the demands of a new medium and a changing audience. Yet, each adaptation, successful or not, contributed to the ongoing conversation about who Nancy Drew is and what she represents. And now, in her most recent incarnations, she confronts a world where the lines between the rational and the supernatural blur. This evolution, particularly embrace of genuine ghosts, is perhaps the most significant departure in her long history. It reflects not only trends in popular entertainment, but also a desire to test this iconic character in new and profound ways. It asks what happens when Nancy's traditional toolkit, logic, observation, deduction, is no longer sufficient. For some, this shift may be a betrayal of the original premise. For others, it's a necessary evolution, allowing Nancy to engage with contemporary anxieties and narrative styles. It forces her to confront not just external mysteries, but perhaps internal uncertainties as well, making her, in some ways, a more complex and relatable figure for a modern audience. The legacy of Nancy Drew, then, is not a static monument, but a living, breathing entity, constantly being reinterpreted and reimagined. Her story is a testament to the enduring power of a strong, intelligent female protagonist. Whether she is unmasking a human culprit in a dusty attic or confronting a spectral entity in a haunted hall, Nancy Drew continues to embody a spirit of adventure and a relentless pursuit of truth. The essayist whose reflections guide this journey shares a personal connection, noting that the name used for their online presence, Larkspur, is taken partly from the title of a favorite Nancy Drew novel, The Password to Larkspur Lane. Published in 1933, it is a small testament to the deep and lasting impact these stories can have. Ultimately, the hope is that each new adaptation, each reinterpretation, serves as a way of reinvigorating Nancy Drew's best qualities. Because those qualities, her adventurous spirit, her quest for independence, her insatiable curiosity, her commitment to asking questions, her sense of responsibility and kindness, and her unwavering eye for mysteries that need solving, have been a great source of inspiration for nearly a century. They have encouraged countless individuals, particularly young women, to find their own adventures, to seek their own truths. In Nancy's mysterious letter, the same book where she promised to have a marvelous time, Nancy also offered a typically modest assessment of her own abilities. I have solved some mysteries. I'll admit, and I enjoy it, but I'm sure there are many other girls who could do the same. Perhaps that is her most enduring legacy, the quiet confidence she instills, the permission she grants to others to be brave, to be smart, to be the heroines of their own stories. The mystery of Nancy Drew herself continues to unfold, and like Nancy, we can't help but look forward to what the next chapter might bring.